Clarisse Roland, founder of Rowland Suites, arrives at her own hotel after a long day of travel, only to be turned away by the receptionist. But she's not backing down. Clarisse Roland stepped out of the sleek black sedan and into the hot Florida sun. The heat hit her like a wall, the kind of oppressive warmth that never quite leaves your skin, even after you've stepped into the shade. She didn't mind. She'd been through worse. It had been a long day of meetings, a plane ride, and an entire schedule of people telling her no in various forms. But now, as she walked toward the front doors of Rowland Suites, the hotel she had built herself from the ground up, she felt a small surge of pride. The large glass doors parted as she approached, welcoming her back to the place that was more than just a business venture. It was her legacy. The hotel had become a symbol of her perseverance, a testament to the years of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless rejections she had endured to create something real in a world that often told people like her that they didn't belong. She stood still for a moment, her leather bag slung over her shoulder, just to take in the sight of the elegant lobby that greeted her, the clean white marble floors, the soft lighting that illuminated the space, the contemporary artwork on the walls, much of it from black artists she had sourced herself. Every inch of this place reflected her vision, her taste, and her refusal to settle for anything less than the best. She wasn't here for recognition. She wasn't here for applause. She was here because she needed rest, a brief respite after a long day of work. It had been months since she'd last been able to step inside her flagship hotel. Her empire had expanded to 15 locations across the Gulf Coast, but this one, Rowland Suites in Tampa, would always be the heart of it all. She pulled up the map on her phone to confirm the room number, 18A, her usual corner suite, as she walked toward the front desk. She had planned everything down to the finest detail: room number, key card, check-in. The process was always smooth for her. Usually, she'd be greeted with a warm smile, maybe even a friendly conversation about how her day had been. After all, she wasn't just a guest here. She owned the place. She had helped design it, create it, fund it. But as she approached the desk, she noticed something that wasn't quite right. The young woman behind the counter was looking down at her phone, fingers tapping the screen with a rhythm that didn't seem to match the polished professionalism of the hotel. Clarisse cleared her throat lightly, a polite but purposeful sound that made the receptionist look up. The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 22, blinked as her eyes landed on Clarisse. Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of confusion in her gaze before she quickly resumed typing, her eyes not quite meeting Clarisse's. Clarisse smiled to herself, her calm demeanor slipping into place. It wasn't the first time someone had failed to recognize her, and it wouldn't be the last. She didn't mind. She had learned long ago that most people didn't really see her until she made them. "Good evening," Clarisse said smoothly, her voice even but firm. "I'm checking in for the night. A suite, please." The receptionist didn't respond immediately, instead flicking her eyes toward the computer screen as she continued typing, her fingers still moving rapidly. Clarisse noticed the small display behind her, a list of available rooms. A handful of them were green and unbooked, which struck her as odd. She hadn't heard the usual greeting that came with check-in. No usual questions, no friendly pleasantries. Finally, the receptionist looked up, her eyes now meeting Clarisse's for the first time, but there was no recognition in them. No shock, no warmth, just a dull kind of indifference. "Sorry, ma'am, we're fully booked tonight," the receptionist said, without skipping a beat. Clarisse blinked, her calm expression slipping slightly. "I'm sorry, did you say we're fully booked?" She glanced behind her at the front desk monitor again. The list was clear. 5 rooms were still listed as available. "Yes, ma'am," the receptionist said without looking up. Our system's a little slow to update. I'd recommend trying the Fairgrove Inn down the street. They're a little cheaper anyway." Clarisse stood still for a moment, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She had been in this position before, but not like this, not in her own hotel. She forced a smile, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes but makes the other person uneasy. "I'm sorry," Clarisse said again, this time softer. "I own this hotel." The receptionist's fingers froze on the keyboard. For the briefest moment, her gaze flickered to the screen, then back to Clarisse. The words didn't seem to land for her at first. "You own Rowland Suites?" she asked slowly, as if trying to piece the concept together. Clarisse nodded, her calm still intact, though the brief flicker of frustration in her chest began to smolder. "Yes, I do. I'd like to check in for the night." There was a silence as the receptionist processed the information, her face betraying confusion, perhaps even disbelief. She cleared her throat, her fingers finally moving again as she typed something into the computer. But this time, her eyes didn't meet Clarisse's. Clarisse took a deep breath, trying to keep her frustration in check. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She just wanted to rest, to return to her home for the night. But the receptionist's subtle dismissal, her failure to recognize Clarisse for who she truly was, stirred something in Clarisse. She felt the all-too-familiar pang of being judged based on appearance, on the assumption that because she wasn't wearing a designer suit and heels, she couldn't possibly be who she said she was. "I'd like a room," Clarisse said firmly, her voice gaining a hint of the authority she carried everywhere else in her life. "The corner suite, 18A, please." The receptionist blinked again, not meeting her gaze. I'm sorry. I don't think we can accommodate walk-ins tonight." Clarisse's jaw tightened, but she didn't let it show. "I don't need a walk-in reservation. I own this hotel, and I expect the same respect as any other guest. Please check your system again. And this time, do it without assuming you know who I am based on how I look." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of experience. Clarisse wasn't asking for special treatment. She was simply demanding what she was owed, not just as a guest, but as the woman who had fought for this place, the woman who had built it. She wasn't asking for a favor, she was asking for respect. Clarisse stood at the front desk, her posture poised and unwavering. She had come to expect the judgment, the assumptions, the casual disregard for her worth based on her appearance. But being turned away in her own hotel? This was something different, something more personal. The receptionist, still fumbling with the keyboard, finally turned the monitor toward Clarisse. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but like I said, the hotel is fully booked tonight. I really do recommend Fairgrove Inn. It's just a couple of blocks away. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable there." Clarisse's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. She had spent years learning the art of restraint, understanding when to push and when to stand still. This wasn't the first time she'd faced dismissive behavior, but this time, this moment, she wasn't going to let it slide. "No," she said softly, but firmly. "I've built this hotel from the ground up, brick by brick. I used my own savings, a few loans I shouldn't have qualified for, and countless hours of hard work. I didn't just build a hotel, I built this place for everyone. So if I'm standing here asking for a room, I expect to get one." The receptionist's fingers froze above the keyboard as the weight of Clarisse's words settled in. But still, there was resistance in her eyes, confusion mixed with uncertainty. She glanced at Clarisse's outfit, simple, functional, not the sharp designer suits worn by high-powered executives. She seemed to believe that this was somehow an indication of her worth, as if appearances could erase the reality of who Clarisse truly was. I, I didn't realize," the receptionist stammered, her voice faltering. Clarisse could see the shift in her, her posture now more rigid, her eyes avoiding direct contact. She knew the receptionist was struggling to reconcile the confident, well-dressed woman in front of her with the one she had assumed was just another tourist. The unspoken prejudice was clear, but Clarisse had never had the luxury of hiding her identity or her hard-earned power behind the masks others wore to protect themselves from judgment. "You didn't realize what?" Clarisse's voice was calm but sharp. "That I could be the owner of this hotel? Or that people who look like me belong here too? I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to do your job." The silence between them stretched longer than Clarisse was comfortable with, but she didn't look away. She stood her ground, her hand still resting lightly on the marble counter, her gaze fixed on the receptionist. Clarisse could feel the eyes of the other staff members now, who had begun to notice the tension between her and the front desk employee. She could almost hear them thinking, "What is going on here?" They hadn't seen this before. They hadn't seen someone of her stature, someone who had created this empire, be treated like an outsider. "Is there a problem here, Kaylee?" came a voice from the back. Clarisse turned to see Roy Velman, the district operations manager, walking toward the front desk. His presence was immediate and commanding. He was in his mid-40s, well-dressed, but not in the way some of the higher-ups at Rowland Suites dressed. Roy didn't need to show off with expensive suits. His authority came from his demeanor, from years of experience running things behind the scenes. He had seen his share of mistakes, but this was different. This wasn't just about a minor slip-up. It was about respect, about assumptions that had been allowed to linger unchecked. Kaylee, still looking flustered, looked up at Roy. "I was just telling this lady that we're fully booked for the night." Her voice trailed off uncertainly as she looked back at Clarisse, unsure of how to proceed. Roy's eyes flicked to Clarisse, then back to the receptionist. "Is this Miss Roland?" Clarisse nodded, her posture still tall. She had no intention of backing down. "Yes. I own this hotel. I'm here for a room, and I expect to be treated as any other guest would be." Roy's face changed instantly. No longer the casual manager, but the person who ran this place, the one who knew how things should operate. He shifted his weight, stepping closer to the desk and taking a moment to glance at the monitor. "Kaylee, I need you to check again. I'm seeing several available rooms on this system." His voice was quieter now, not harsh, but firm, like someone who was used to making things right. Kaylee hesitated. She knew Roy wasn't asking for an explanation. He was telling her to fix the mistake, and she knew it. She typed furiously on the keyboard, avoiding eye contact with Clarisse. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife. The receptionist's hands trembled slightly as she looked back at the system. Finally, after a long pause, Kaylee spoke again. "Okay. I can get you a room. A suite, like you requested." Clarisse felt a small knot loosen in her chest, but the moment had already taken its toll. She wasn't just asking for a room. She was demanding that the system, the people, the structures, recognize her for what she had fought so hard to achieve. It wasn't just about the room. It was about ensuring that this place she had built wasn't just for the privileged, for those who looked a certain way. It was for everyone, whether they wore suits or sneakers, whether they had money or not. "Thank you," Clarisse said calmly, her voice measured but strong. "I expect this to be a reminder for everyone here that we don't treat people differently based on how they look. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same respect." Kaylee nodded quickly, clearly embarrassed, though she didn't say a word. Roy stepped in, handing Clarisse her key card with both hands, his expression professional but acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "Corner suite, 18A, Roy said, his tone softening as he turned back to Kaylee. "I'll be reviewing your performance after this shift." Clarisse nodded in acknowledgement, taking the key and walking toward the elevator, her stride steady and composed. As she passed through the lobby, she noticed a few guests looking her way, some of them nodding in her direction, sensing something had transpired but unsure of the details. Before she reached the elevator, she paused. She turned back and looked at Kaylee, who was still standing by the front desk, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I built this hotel for everyone," Clarisse said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard across the lobby. "Not just for the polished and the wealthy, for everyone. I hope you remember that." And with that, she stepped into the elevator, the doors closing softly behind her, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Clarisse's heart still beat a little faster as she stepped into her suite. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She didn't know what had been more exhausting, the long day of meetings and travel or the brief but intense exchange at the front desk, but there was something about it that felt necessary, like a moment that was overdue. She set her bag on the sleek, polished surface of the desk and walked toward the window. The city of Tampa sprawled out beneath her, the lights twinkling like stars caught in the grid of streets. She had built this, all of it. Every inch of this hotel had her fingerprint on it. It was more than just a business, it was a statement. But tonight, it had felt like that statement was being questioned. Not just by Kaylee, the receptionist who had failed to recognize her, but by the assumptions that still lingered in places like this. The places where wealth and privilege often decided who belonged and who didn't. Clarisse closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool glass for a moment. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She had let the anger go the moment she had walked into the lobby. But there was something else, a quiet realization that even after all her success, after all the hotels she had built, she still had to prove her worth in ways no one else did. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned, her posture straightening instinctively. "Come in," she called out. The door opened slowly and Roy stepped inside, his usual confident stride tempered with a slight hesitance. "Miss Roland," he began, his voice a little more formal than usual, "I wanted to check on you." Clarisse gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. I just needed some time to decompress." Roy nodded, but there was more to his visit than that. "I know I'm the one who should have caught that earlier. It's my responsibility to ensure our staff knows who we're serving, and I apologize for the mistake. It won't happen again." Clarisse looked at him for a moment, her eyes sharp. Roy was good at his job. Everyone at Rowland Suites knew that. But this wasn't about a mistake. This was about something deeper, something systemic that had quietly taken root in their culture. "It's not just about the room, Roy," Clarisse said quietly. "It's not just about what happened with Kaylee tonight. It's about the assumptions we make about people, how we judge them based on how they look, how they're dressed. I'm tired of it." Roy shifted slightly, discomfort flickering in his gaze. He wasn't used to seeing Clarisse like this, not vulnerable, but still shaken in a way that was rare for her. "I understand," he said after a beat, "and I'm with you. I'll make sure the rest of the staff gets the message. We can't afford to let these things slide, especially in our hotel." Clarisse turned away from the window, her eyes meeting his. "It's not just about the staff, it's about all of us. We built this hotel for everyone, and if we can't make sure everyone feels welcome, whether they're wearing a suit or sneakers, then we've failed. This place, this brand, is built on respect. We can't forget that." Roy's gaze softened. "You've made it clear. I'll handle it. Don't worry about it." Clarisse nodded, her shoulders relaxing. The brief moment of tension dissipated, but the message had been delivered. The hotel wasn't just a place to stay. It was a statement, a reflection of the values she wanted to impart, values that would define not just the success of her business, but the kind of legacy she left behind. "Thank you, Roy," she said quietly, her tone resolute. "I'm going to make sure we never forget what this place stands for." Clarisse's dinner was a quiet affair, a meal she ordered from the hotel's kitchen, a comforting bowl of tomato bisque and a salad. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the peace of the moment. But as she finished, she knew she had more work to do. She pulled out her phone and quickly sent an email to the entire Rowland Suites team. She'd been thinking about this for a while, but now it seemed more necessary than ever. Subject: a reminder. Dear team, I want to remind everyone of why we're here. Rowland Suites isn't just a hotel. It's a place where everyone belongs, no matter who they are, what they wear, or how they look. We don't just provide rooms, we provide respect, we provide dignity, and above all, we provide an experience that doesn't judge a guest based on their appearance, their wealth, or their background. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same courtesy and professionalism. I expect this from all of you, no exceptions. We built Rowland Suites for everyone. Let's make sure we never forget that. Best, Clarisse Roland founder and CEO Clarisse sat back in her chair, looking at the email for a moment before pressing send. She felt a small but reassuring sense of closure. It wasn't just about confronting Kaylee or even making sure this never happened again. It was about ensuring that this was a culture change, one that would take root and affect everyone who walked through their doors, from staff to guests. Her phone buzzed just a moment later with a response from Roy. "I've already scheduled a meeting with the front desk team tomorrow morning. We'll go over this. Don't worry, it'll be handled." Clarisse smiled. It wasn't just Roy's words. It was the fact that he understood, that he was taking this seriously. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about making sure Rowland Suites was a place where anyone, no matter who they were, would feel like they truly belonged. The next morning, Clarisse stood in front of the entire front desk team, all of them gathered in the hotel's small conference room. The staff looked up at her with varying expressions, some nervous, some confident, but all ready to listen. "We don't tolerate disrespect in this hotel," Clarisse began, her voice steady but filled with authority. "Whether it's from a guest or from a member of the staff, every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with the same respect, no matter who they are." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I built this hotel for people like you, for people like me, for people who have been overlooked and underestimated, and I expect all of you to carry that respect with you every day." She looked around the room, her eyes meeting each of their gazes. "If you don't understand that yet, you will. And if you can't respect that, then this isn't the place for you." There was a moment of silence, then a few nods. The message was clear. "Now," Clarisse said with a small, knowing smile, "let's get back to work." Clarisse sat at the desk in her suite, her laptop open, but her mind far from the screen. The evening had stretched on quietly, the weight of the day's events settling heavily on her shoulders. She delivered her message to the front desk team, but something still gnawed at her. It wasn't just about what had happened with Kaylee. It was about the culture she had built, or thought she had built, and the realization that it still needed work. She sighed, closing the laptop and standing up. There was a slight tremor in her legs from the long day, but she steadied herself as she walked to the window. The view over the city was calming, the lights twinkling in the distance like stars. She had done everything she could to create a place where anyone could feel welcome, but moments like these reminded her that change wasn't instantaneous. Even in the places she had built, there were still cracks in the foundation. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Roy, the district operations manager, who had been handling the fallout from the front desk incident. She picked up the phone and unlocked it, her fingers moving across the screen to read his message. Just got out of the meeting. I've spoken with the team. They understand the importance of what happened. I'll be following up with Kaylee tomorrow. Don't worry, this won't happen again. Clarisse read the message twice, her eyes scanning the words with a sense of quiet relief. She hadn't expected everything to be fixed immediately, but it was good to know that the wheels of change were already in motion. The next step was ensuring it became part of the hotel's culture. She had worked hard to build this business, to create a space that defied the norms of the hospitality industry, but that wasn't enough. She couldn't rest until she knew every single person who worked for Rowland Suites understood what it stood for. She typed back quickly. Good. Keep me updated. I want to make sure we're doing this right, not just for today, but for every guest who walks through those doors. Clarisse put the phone down, then moved back toward the window, her reflection in the glass staring back at her. The night had settled in, the soft hum of the city below, a reminder that life would continue. But she knew that things would be different now. It wasn't just about standing her ground with one receptionist. It was about making sure that her hotel was a place that didn't just cater to the rich and polished, but to everyone who walked in. The next morning, Clarisse awoke early, as usual. The jet lag from her business trip had started to catch up with her, but there was no time to rest. There was a meeting with the corporate team at 9 a.m., and she was determined to address everything she had noticed during her brief visit the day before. She showered quickly and slipped into a comfortable yet professional outfit, an ensemble she knew would blend in with the staff, yet still command respect when she entered the room. By the time she arrived in the conference room, most of the team had already gathered around the long oval table. Roy was there, along with several other senior managers and department heads, including the HR director, the operations team, and some of the key people who helped manage day-to-day activities at Rowland Suites. Clarisse greeted everyone with a brief nod before she took her seat at the head of the table. There was an air of anticipation in the room, and she could feel the subtle shift in energy. The team knew why she was there, and they knew this conversation wasn't going to be business as usual. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the room settle. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but commanding. I wanted to bring us all together this morning to talk about something that happened yesterday. It's not easy for me to address, but it's important. The incident at the front desk wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was a reminder that we have to do better. There was a slight murmur around the table, but no one interrupted. Clarisse's presence commanded respect, and everyone knew that when she spoke, it wasn't for the sake of a lecture, but for the sake of progress. We are building something here, something different from every other hotel chain in the industry, she continued. Rowland Suites isn't just a business, it's a statement, a reflection of the values I believe in. And those values don't just stop at providing a place to stay, they go much deeper. They go into the culture we create for our guests, our staff, and ourselves. She paused, looking around the room, making sure everyone was following. The incident with Kaylee yesterday wasn't about one employee. It's about something deeper, something that runs through the entire industry and has no place in this hotel. It's about the assumptions we make based on someone's appearance, and we need to change that. Roy shifted in his seat, a quiet nod of agreement, but it was clear the message was sinking in. I don't care what someone looks like when they walk through those doors, Clarisse said, her voice firm, her gaze steady. I don't care if they're wearing a designer suit or old jeans. If they've chosen Rowland Suites, we treat them with the same respect, no exceptions. If we want to be different, if we want to be better than the rest, we need to start showing it, every day, with every person who steps foot in this hotel. The HR director, a middle-aged woman with glasses, spoke up. We've always trained our staff on diversity and inclusion, but I can see that we may need to do more. This isn't just about policies, it's about behavior, how we interact, how we treat every guest, no matter their background. Clarisse nodded. Exactly. We need to go beyond surface-level training. I want real change, a shift in how we operate from top to bottom. We'll start with the front desk, but this needs to extend across every department. A few heads nodded in agreement, and Clarisse felt the shift she'd hoped for. The team wasn't just listening, they were ready to act. I want a meeting with every department head this afternoon, Clarisse continued. We'll start with the front desk, but then we'll look at how we're interacting with guests in every area: housekeeping, food and beverage, security. Everyone needs to understand this, and we need to hold each other accountable. Roy spoke up again. I'll make sure the staff is on board. We'll follow up with more comprehensive training. I'll also work on revising the onboarding process to make sure this kind of behavior isn't just overlooked. Clarisse smiled, the first real smile she'd had since the incident. Good. Let's make sure we stay true to what we've built here. Let's make sure we're a place where everyone, every single person, feels welcome. As the meeting adjourned, Clarisse felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for it. Her vision had always been about more than just luxury. It was about respect. And now, she had a team ready to help her bring that vision to life, not just for the guests, but for everyone working at Rowland Suites. She stood up from the table feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a hotel. This was a legacy. And now, it was time to make sure it reflected the values she had fought so hard for. The days after the meeting felt like a turning point for Rowland Suites. Clarisse had set the foundation for a culture shift, and now it was up to her team to follow through. She wasn't one to micromanage. She trusted the people she had hired, and she knew that they were capable of bringing about real change. But there was still something in the back of her mind, a nagging feeling that this wasn't enough. It never felt like enough. Not until she could see the change reflected in every corner of her hotel. A week had passed since that night, the night she'd been turned away in her own hotel. The staff had undergone the initial training, but now Clarisse was starting to see the subtle signs of change. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there. A little more respect in the way guests were greeted, a little more warmth in the interactions, a little more patience from the front desk staff when someone wasn't dressed in the right way. One afternoon, Clarisse was sitting in her office reviewing some reports when Roy knocked on the door and walked in, his face more relaxed than usual. I just wanted to let you know, Roy began, sitting down in the chair across from her. The front desk has made some real progress. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. Clarisse nodded, taking in the news with quiet satisfaction. That's good. I expected nothing less. Roy smiled. I also had a chat with Kaylee. She's been a bit shaken by the whole thing. I think she's starting to understand where she went wrong, not just in how she treated you, but in how she views the guests. Clarisse's expression softened. She had known that the confrontation with Kaylee had been hard on her. It wasn't easy to be confronted with your own biases, especially when you hadn't even realized they were there. But Clarisse wasn't in the business of breaking people down. She was in the business of building them up. And sometimes, growth came from discomfort. I'm glad to hear it, Clarisse said. I want this to be a lesson for everyone. Not just Kaylee, but all of us. We can't afford to just tolerate people. We have to truly see them. Every guest who walks through that door deserves to feel like they belong here, no matter where they come from, what they wear, or how much money they have. Roy nodded. Exactly. And I think we're starting to get there. I've also spoken with the kitchen staff, housekeeping, everyone. We're making sure they understand that this isn't just about checking in a guest. It's about creating an experience for them, a welcoming experience that doesn't judge them before they even say hello. Clarisse's lips curled into a small smile. It sounds like we're on the right track. Just then, Clarisse's phone buzzed on the desk. interrupting their conversation. She glanced at it, then picked it up. It was an email from the HR department, subject line, employee feedback on new training program. She opened it, quickly scanning the feedback from various staff members. Most of it was positive, enthusiastic even. Employees were recognizing the shift in the hotel's atmosphere, and many had expressed gratitude for the opportunity to learn and grow. One message, however, stood out. It was from Kaylee, the receptionist, who had been the catalyst for the entire change. Miss Roland, I wanted to personally thank you for the opportunity to reflect on my actions and learn from this experience. I never truly understood how my behavior could affect someone, especially a guest. I've always just done my job, but now I see that it's not just about checking people in. It's about treating them with respect, no matter who they are. I'm grateful for your patience and for showing me what it means to truly be part of something bigger than just a job. Sincerely, Kaylee. Clarisse read the message twice before setting her phone down. There it was. The proof that the change had begun. It wasn't just about policies and training sessions. It was about the people who worked at Rowland Suites realizing that their role was bigger than just a job. It was about fostering a culture of respect and inclusivity. She looked up at Roy, who was watching her closely. I think we're making a real difference here, she said, her voice full of quiet pride. Roy smiled. I agree. But we're just getting started. As the weeks went by, Clarisse continued to monitor the progress. The front desk team had made noticeable improvements, and there was a clear shift in how guests were treated, even in the smallest moments. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better. And better, for Clarisse, was always enough. One evening, Clarisse returned to Rowland Suites after a long day of business meetings. She was tired, but as she walked through the lobby, she couldn't help but notice how different it felt. The atmosphere was warm, welcoming. There was no hint of judgment, no cool reception from the staff. There was just a sense of hospitality, real, genuine hospitality. A family was checking in at the front desk, and Clarisse overheard the receptionist greeting them warmly. Welcome to Rowland Suites. We're so glad to have you with us. Is this your first time staying with us? The family smiled and nodded, clearly relieved by the friendly greeting. It was the kind of small moment that Clarisse had envisioned when she first started this hotel, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax. This was what she had worked for. This was the legacy she was building, not just in bricks and mortar, but in the hearts of everyone who walked through those doors. Clarisse sat at her desk later that night, reflecting on everything she had achieved and the path still ahead. She knew there would be more challenges, more moments where things wouldn't be perfect. But for now, she was content. Rowland Suites wasn't just a hotel, it was a place where people could come, feel respected, and truly belong. She stood up, taking one last look at the city outside before turning off the lights in her office. Tomorrow, there would be more work to do, more changes to implement. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that the fight for respect and inclusion was never truly over. But for now, they were winning.